I'm much into dual sport motorcycles, and my all-time favorite is the current XR350R Honda, a converted Enduro motorcycle. The other keeper is my 1984 Honda XR350R Enduro motorcycle that I've had since the mid-1990s. Would I trade or sell my 1984 Honda XR350R and replace it with a CRF300L? Let's make some comparisons. The vintage air-cooled XR350R engines feature a unique radial 4-valve combustion chamber, RFVC, cylinder head, and a single overhead camshaft. The 1984 dual-carbureted 339cc engine produces 31.8 horsepower at 7,000 RPM and 22.3 foot-pounds of torque at 6,500 RPM. These are factory specifications for maximum engine output. The CRF300L's double overhead camshaft engine produces 27.3 horsepower at 8,500 RPM and 19.6 pound-feet of torque at 6,500 RPM. Each of these bikes has relatively high compression. The Kickstart XR350R is 9.5 to 1 with an auto decompressor to make foot cranking easier. On the CRF350L at 10.7 to 1 compression, electric starting eliminates the kickstart lever. Both engines use a counterbalance shaft to smooth out the single-cylinder pulses and vibration. The useful range of torque for my kind of single-track, two-track, or enduro riding is from idle to 6,000 RPM. Here, the XR350R engine excels, producing tractor-like power in the lower RPM band. The street bike origins of the CRF300L engine revealed themselves in the power curve. 8,500 RPM is ridiculously high for a bona fide enduro bike. Fortunately, gearing and EFI compensate nicely for the engine's power curve deficits. The CRF's electronic fuel injection has many advantages, especially fuel efficiency, ease of cold starting, and the ability to compensate for altitude changes. The XR350R has progressive dual carburetors and a reed valve between intake runners that smoothly brings a secondary carburetor into play around 1/3 throttle, if the linkage is adjusted properly. The bad rap about dual carburetors is totally unwarranted here. The secondary carburetor has only a main jet. If there is interest, I'll do a how-to video on how to adjust dual carburetors on a single-cylinder Honda XR350R or XR500R motorcycle. Of course, any motorcycle carburetor must be jetted correctly for riding at various altitudes. With the correct adjustments, these two carburetors have worked flawlessly and provided unnoticeable throttle transitions for decades. As for additional factory power tuning, note the diameter of the twin exhaust pipes. Each one is bigger than the single exhaust pipe on the CRF300L. Add to this an aftermarket Super Trap tunable tailpipe and spark arrestor. This XR350R engine was a true desert competitor and very popular among the generation of riders that emerged from the On Any Sunday era of vertical rear shock absorber desert scramblers. My 1969 BSA 441 Victor Special was a remarkable machine for its era, but would not hold a candle to the handling of my later Honda XR350R, XR500R, or XR650R motorcycles. In 1985, Honda increased the stroke on the XR350R and brought the displacement to 353 cc's. A single carburetor replaced a more involved twin-intake dual carburetor setup on my 84. Performance allegedly increased, but the motive was more likely the simplicity of a single carburetor and creating a displacement that offset the performance loss of the switch to a single carburetor. A longer stroke on any engine means more piston travel and shorter ring life. I'm satisfied with the dual-carbureted 339cc 1984 engine. I've ridden this bike since the mid-90s on the same set of piston rings and valves. When I finally do a top-end refresh with the iron cylinder, I'll be more than happy with this engine's service life to date. Despite any air cooling shortfalls, this engine has never balked or required major work. The XR350R era was among a highly competitive crop of enduro and open desert motorcycles. Technology advanced rapidly from the late 70s to 2000s, and a key asset and breakthrough, one that remains to this day on the CRF models, was the ProLink rear suspension. The XR200R, XR350R, and XR500R each feature excellent suspension. My XR350R came stock with air-adjustable 41mm Showa front forks. An adjustable gas-charged rear monoshock is also a Showa. The front forks provide 11 inches of travel, and ground clearance is a full 12.2 inches. While the CRF front fork has a rake of 27.5 degrees and trail of 4.3 inches, the XR is a steeper 26 degrees rake with 3.9 inches of trail. Factory spec for the wheelbase length is 55.3 inches versus 57.2 inches for the CRF. A longer wheelbase with more rake and trail on the CRF300L may be for highway stability and to help counter speed wobble. The XR350R has always been a nimble, responsive off-pavement bike at any speed. Suspension travel and ground clearance are less on the CRF300L, with ground clearance at 11.2 inches. This could be a disadvantage in single-track rocky terrain or an extreme overland venture like the Rubicon Trail. This CRF300L does not have a skid plate and vitally needs an aftermarket upgrade here. On that note, I avoid plastic skid plates and get a skid plate that can support the bike's weight and protect the frame tubes and engine cases. Weight savings are everywhere on dirt bikes, and this is even more of a challenge with the factory dual sport bikes. This CRF non-ABS bike is on a diet to achieve its 309-pound wet curb weight. Weight challenges include the electric starter and battery, turn signals, liquid cooling in a radiator, the horn, trim like a chain guard, mirrors, and plastic shielding. By contrast, the XR350R is devoid of street gear and electric starting, yet still weighs 247 pounds dry and approximately 268 pounds wet. Before the CRF era, the open-class four-strokes were much heavier than two-stroke motorcycles. Adding to the XR350R weight is rugged chrome moly semi-cradle tube frame versus a lighter weight frame of the CRF300L that shaves off pounds. Worth noting, both of these bikes have semi-double cradle frames. So would I sell or trade in the Honda XR350R for a CRF300L? To begin with, this is not a fair comparison. The CRF300L can be plated from the dealership. For the XR350R to be street legal would require an aftermarket kit and cooperative state DMV. Since Nevada still allows a conversion to a dual sport, plating would be feasible here. However, in many states, there is no way to plate an off-road enduro motorcycle. The CRF is attractive, with its 70 miles per gallon fuel efficiency and clean tailpipe ratings, electric start, and EFI. It feels right at home on the highway, street, or reasonable trails. I will evaluate its off-road performance, but overall, how can we knock a Swiss Army knife dual sport? In my initial off and on-road impressions of this bike, the motocross simulated seat was okay cushioning, and a saddle height of 34.7 inches feels livable. My XR650R towers above both of these bikes at a lofty 37-inch saddle height. Ironically, the XR350R has a lower saddle height once the rider sits on the cushion that enables all-day riding in the open desert or trails. Frankly, the XR350R is more forgiving for a seated rider than any of the current factory dual sport bikes. That cannot be said for an XR650R with its brick-hard factory motocross type seat. So this is not an apples for apples comparison. The XR350R was purpose-built to compete at open desert and enduro racing. My XR350R was set up by the previous owner for hare and hound racing. Fortunately, the bike only competed in one easy race and retired unscathed. The CRF300L is a bike that serves multi-purposes. Admirably, a CRF300L is okay at a range of uses, and it's street legal. Would it hold up to the rigors of enduro racing? Probably not, but it has more than proven itself as a global traveler, traversing remote dirt and paved roads. I'm not giving up my XR350R to get a CRF300L. But if I wanted an affordable, bona fide dual sport bike in today's market, the CRF300L or Rally would be a serious contender. All the bells and whistles are there. ABS is optional, and there's tremendous bang for the buck in these light, nimble Honda models. On that note, Honda dirt bikes and being a Red Rider have been family traditions for more than 3 decades. Our stable of XRs would readily welcome a CRF300L into the mix.